Hello, today I wanted to talk about kind of my thoughts on where Tekken 8 is at the moment. Tekken 8, I think overall, is a great game with lots of content to offer. There's casual modes that have done really well, like the story mode, great music, jukebox, cool characters, music. Overall, I think it's a great game. Um, but I just think some of the current balance where the game's at leaves something to be desired. Something that just kind of stuck out to me, especially with some of the characters on screen in particular, is just kind of a growing direction of where Tekken 8 seems to be heading. Some of the moves that really stick out, especially during the beginning of Season 2, where everyone was trying to play older Tekken games, these moves really didn't exist, and so they really become apparent when you go back to Tekken 8. Some of the moves in particular that are particularly egregious to me are things like Brian's backsway 1. This move is just, it covers so much space, it's difficult to step, plus on block, counter hit launcher. It's just really effective at closing the gap, and a lot of people refer to these kind of moves as neutral skipping because you're not playing, the small Tekken game where we're trying to control space and use small pokes to get in and then go from there. You kind of just sit at a range around 2 or 3 and then just send it. This move in particular, it is a high, but like I said, it's difficult to step. But even if you were trying to duck it, he has this option, which is a safe mid that is also extremely hard, if not impossible to step. This move in Tekken 7 was unsafe on block because it was a wall bounce, but now in Tekken 8 it's a safe mid heat engager, and on top of that it's also a launching heat engager. And so it becomes a situation where, okay, well, I don't want to just sit here, blocking this move because it's plus on block, so I'll try and step it. But if you try and step it, it becomes difficult. If we program the dummy, let's see if we can replicate this situation. So we block it. But there are ways to get around it. You certainly can do it, but this is at a pretty close range. There are ways to step these moves, but if you're, just sitting here, in the neutral, you don't know when he's going to throw it out. So the odds of you just getting the perfect step at that situation are tough. And even if you were to do it, he has other moves like this that are very difficult to step, if not, again, impossible. Again, up close, it's more doable. But typically the players like Brian aren't going to be throwing this move out like point blank. It's going to be much further away where they throw moves like this. And so again, it turns into a situation where we're further away, and instead of playing the small Tekken game, especially with a character like Brian, who historically, he wants to get in. I guess his probably biggest move previously, you'd use something like 3+4. It's a good long-range solution. Counter hit launcher, but it's not going to get any pressure started. It's just more of like a keep away tool, and if you run into it in a counter hit launcher, it's good. But this move, backsway 1, now this is closing the distance, and he's plus on block, so he's getting pressure started, and he's starting it from back here, and if you try and duck it, you run into this. So, if you duck, you've got a safe mid, and if you don't duck, you're getting looped by pressure like this. And it covers such a large distance, it really does, it feels like a move that is, obviously it's a new move in Tekken 8, but it seems to be a direction that a lot of moves kind of follow. Another example of that would be the other character we have on screen here, Anna. Anna has, some new moves and then also just some tweaks to moves that she's had previously that's also kind of follow the same philosophy. A big example would be forward forward 2. Anna's had this move before, and it behaved in a similar fashion. Approaching, plus on block, homing, high. And, that's kind of how Anna will get some of her pressure started. She'd use that, and then Anna's a close range mix-up character, so she would go from there, and whatever pressure she wanted to do. But now, it's 4-4-2 from previous games, but there's a rocket launcher attached to it, so since she's got more of her weapon moves in this game, she can do it from much further away. So we're sitting here to range 3.5, 4-4-2, and it hits even from here. And so now this move actually is homing, so you can't step it at all. And again, it's a high, and it's plus on block, and it leads to a guaranteed follow-up. So if it's a high, what do you want to do? You want to step. Well, the problem is they also gave her forward, forward, 3-2. And so this move doesn't have quite as much range, but it's got some decent range. We're sitting about around 2.7, and that's going to hit. If you're sitting around 2.5, even if they backdash a bit, you could still, approach with it. Delay the 3 input, so dash dash delay 3, and you're going to get even more range on it. And this is again a safe mid heat engager that in heat becomes a full launcher. So this is kind of the problem with a lot of moves that behave like this, is that it's turns it into a more 2D game. You don't want to step because we've got a homing high. You don't want to duck because we've got the safe mid. And the problem is that you can do it from so far away. If you have strong, mids or strong plus frame moves up close, you might have earned that. You might have had to slowly work your way in, and then once you're in and they didn't check your, dashes coming in, then you can start some offense. But these moves can be hit from so far away that they are, neutral skipping is a word that people like to use, but I just think it really stifles the movement and limits some of these small, close range Tekken. You worked in, you used your proper movement to get in, and now you can start your offense. So some of the moves like that are just more and more commonplace, and I do like Tekken 8 overall. I just think that some of these moves, they aren't going anywhere. I don't see a future where these moves get removed or even really necessarily toned down. I can't imagine. This move has been 4-4-2 even in previous Tekken games, even without the rocket launcher attached to it. It was always a plus on block high, so I don't see that changing. And I don't see them, getting rid of this move. I don't think they'd make it, unsafe either. But yeah, I just think these kind of moves have really creeped up in Tekken 8, and I think it really takes away from the thing that made me fall in love with the game. I gravitated more towards Tekken because it didn't have things like projectile characters and zoning. It was just a lot more smaller, in-your-face movements that you use to get close to your opponent and then start your offense from there. Trying to think if there's any other characters that really stand out to me. I mean, there's plenty of characters and moves and things like that have been tweaked and become more of this Tekken 8 style of just throwing big moves out across the screen. There's, I guess, in a different sense, there's not so much on that same vein of the big moves that are being thrown out. I just think some characters have really changed, in my opinion, for the worse. I think Heihachi's a good example of this. Heihachi was one of the most exciting characters in Tekken 8 because he's a Mishima, high execution, and he didn't have a lot of simple answers to problems. If you blocked a -15 low, your only option to launch would be to instant crouch cancel into an electric. And I clearly don't play Mishimas because I don't land electrics. But, now he's got a full crouch down forward too. And it seems like a consideration with this character is they wanted to give people, more easy, accessible ways to play this character without having to rely on such crazy execution. But in doing so, you kind of remove a lot of the identity from the character. Heihachi was, of all the Mishimas, I think, one of the hardest, in my opinion, the most exciting, because he was so difficult, because he didn't have those simple solutions to those problems. That's what made him interesting. And, changing it up to do simple solutions like this certainly makes him a more, viable character. You don't need to have crazy execution all the time. And, even for standing punishment, this isn't a launcher, but it's a 15-frame punish, something simple instead of having to do an electric every single time. And, he's got, new moves like down forward 1-2. This is safe. You can charge up and make it plus. You obviously can step this, so it's not a one-size-fits-all. But if you're trying to step that, you're going to get hit by down forward 1-1. This is chargeable now. And then, another thing with Tekken 8 is so many characters just go into stances off of all sorts of different moves. This goes into the stance and gets follow-ups. This can go into the stance. It's so much of the pressure ends with a character, going to his stance and then resetting that. My main character is a perfect example of that as well. Jack is and even before we get to Jack, if you take a look at just the character roster here, nearly every single character in this game has a stance. I think the only one I can think of at the top of my head that doesn't have any sort of stance is Claudio. And some characters don't have as much. Brian's got, backsway and forward sway moves, but I don't think that's, quite as much of a stance. Um, but, Heihachi, he's in stance more often than ever before. Anna got, I think, multiple new stance, for sure at least one, but yeah, multiple new stances and transitions from that, and they changed up inputs. It's become so many more, like, and even like Feng, they made it so his back three, like he's had the same, Kempo step, shifting clouds has become a lot stronger in this game, so you're going to be spending more time in stance because there's better options from it, like guaranteed follow-ups. And then there's just more moves that go into stance, like when they made this change in Season 2 that back 3 goes into stance, so... and they even made it so back 3 by itself is less plus on block. Plus 4 is still great, but now being plus 6 is even better, and you just kind of loop pressure like this. You go into stance and force a 50-50. Go into stance, 50-50. That's such a huge component of Tekken 8. But when you give it to nearly every character in the cast, it makes the game feel so much more homogenized. But back to what I was saying before I got off topic. Jack, never had a stance. One of the things I love so much about Jack in Tekken 7 is he was just such a very simple character. It's a lot of down back 1. Before his full crouch, down back 1 was even better, faster, safe on block. Just small pokes like this, 2 jab, down back 1. Using small pokes to control space, and then, getting the opponent frustrated. They're tired of blocking lows, and then that opens them up for the mids. Long range whiff punishing with down forward 2. It had longer range before, but it's still very solid. But now Jack has joined the Tekken 8 epidemic, and he too has a stance. And you spend so much time in stance as Jack, because 1-1 is really a pretty brain-dead autopilot move. You can just throw it out and B+, and you don't have to commit to anything. If they try and mash, you can just sit here and block, so there's no risk there either. And if they get tired of just sitting there, because the counterplay to this is just to sidestep left, and then you can beat several of the options, if not all of them, that Jack has. Sidestep left and block will deal with most problems that Jack will present to you. But once they get tired of, just sitting there and blocking, then you can throw out this as a frame trap, and then this, is +4 again, and the pressure loops into itself. If they're just sitting there blocking, you can do this in your +11. But it's just so much time that is spent in stance, and it was just so jarring to see it on a character like Jack, who never had a stance before. And now, all of a sudden, we're spending so much time over stance. We're going to stance off of different moves, and it's just looping into itself. Like, moves that end in a stance and loop pressure into another stance and just continue the 50-50 is just widespread in Tekken 8. And if it was just, a new character that was doing that, then you would have no frame of reference, like, oh, this character's been, changed from what I know. But when it's so many characters, and you're changing legacy characters in so many ways, it just gets too homogenized. Too many of the characters feel the exact same because they are doing the same thing. Again, looping stance, pressure, and 50-50s into itself over and over again. I'm trying to think if there's, and people have said, I don't know a ton about Steve, but people have talked to death about how Steve has just become this Lionheart machine. You're just looping Lionheart over and over again into itself. And with Jack, that's, I don't particularly enjoy the Gamma Howl stance. I think there's some cool stuff with it. You've got cool combos like this, where he goes in the stance and he can turn it into something interesting. He does have cool stuff from it, certainly. But I really find myself, especially again, when we were going back and playing old Tekken games when Season 2 was in a particularly rough spot, just missing that small Tekken of just, small pokes, working your way in, baiting out whiffs, whiff punishing. And a thought that I had was just that, you have to be good at Tekken overall, as a game, as, with legacy skill, as a franchise, to succeed at Tekken 8 at a high level. We're still seeing a lot of the same players at the top. Nii is doing great. Arslan's doing great. These are players that we saw do great in Tekken 7, continue to do well in Tekken 8. So, it's not like legacy skill isn't rewarded. But I just feel like the way you do well in this game is so different than the way you do well in any other Tekken game. Like, I'm sitting here doing things like Jack 1-1, it's my safe plus on block pressure if they try and pressure back at me. I've got a safe armored move, and then if they try and swing into it, it becomes a full launcher. Like, I'm just throwing out pressure like this, like plus frames into safe, into pushback, into plus frames, into, you know, safe pressure. It's like none of this like exists in old games. I mean, even in armor in Tekken 7 isn't. There are certainly safe armor moves, but I'm not like just looping a safe situation into another safe situation, into another big move, into another situation, and they're scared to press, and then now I'm plus, and I loop this into itself. You know, and this is a change in Season 2 Jack Cat as well. This move became plus in heat, so now it's +8, and it's a huge move. I'm sitting here about halfway across the screen, and you can certainly step this move, but if you're not looking for this move in particular, if you're sitting at range, you know, 3.5, I don't know what move you'd really be trying to step. But, you know, I'm sitting all the way back here, and I get to throw out from range 3.5 a big plus frame mid that's +8, and if you're going to, you know, respect my plus frames, I can kind of just loop it into something else, into something else, into this. You know, a sequence like that just doesn't exist in older games. And I don't think that Tekken 8 should be the same as all the other games. They clearly went for something else. But I just think that we've gone too far in this direction of big plus frame moves, you know, whether it be a homing plus frame mid, or even if it's a high, just these big moves that cover so much distance and get you in the opponent's face and force a mix-up. I don't think it's the direction we should be heading in. And if that is the direction they want to go in, obviously this is the game they want to make, and it's not for me. That's totally fine. And again, Tekken 8 is a great game, and there's lots of things to love about it. You know, even with the things I said earlier about Brian, you know, I don't really enjoy these moves. You still need to know how to play like Brian at his core to do well with them. You know, abusing mental frames. You know, people are waiting for the down forward 2-3 extension. You abuse that and you go for a down forward 2 forward 3, and you extend these mental frames to turn into big counter hits. That stuff is still here. You know, mental pressure. People are expecting you to extend down forward 1-1, and then you steal your turn back with something like a 1-2-1. You know, forward 3, it's 0. They think, you know, you might mash, you know, 10 frame jab here, but instead you extend it for another forward 3. More mental frames. You know, these things that make, you know, Brian who he is, and make these characters who they are still in the game, 100%. It's not like the identity of Tekken has been completely removed, but it's just been, I think, buried under these very powerful moves that cover a wide variety of scenarios, that it can sometimes be difficult to see the great, you know, aspects of Tekken that are underneath. And I think that's why when you see someone like Nee do well is so inspirational, because he certainly uses moves like backswing 1, course over forward 1+2, but he's not using it all the time. He's using them far more sparingly. And he is still, you know, using the skills that he's developed for decades to play, you know, small Tekken and manage space control. But it's just, again, I think the changes to the characters and the moves to the systems are not where I want it to be, and I hope that it can move in a more positive direction going forward, but we'll see. Tekken 8 is still interesting, and it's still at its core Tekken, but not necessarily where I want it to be.